Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Paul, and in this short Game Tech.com video, we're going to be discussing and analysing tech news which, as usual, has popped up over the past 24 or so hours. We're going to start things out with the rumours of Polaris 30, which is yet another refresh of the Polaris architecture. AMD, of course, originally released Polaris with the 400 series of GPUs, with the 470 and 480 being very popular with mainstream gamers. Then AMD took the simple route of simply upping the clock speeds of the core and so on, and this provided a modest performance boost over the older architecture and released these cards at the 500 series and a refresh. But they want to release one final refresh of the Polaris series on the 12nm process. These rumours have been doing the rounds for some time now, but the website PC Online claims to have verified these rumours independently via a high-end AIB who, of course, is remaining nameless. So what do we actually learn? Well, in terms of shaders and the base specifications of the GPUs, it is almost identical, but because it is on a 12nm process, we do see the clock speeds of these GPUs increase. Memory configuration, such as the bus width, remain the same, as does the inclusion of GDDR5. So anyone expecting GDDR5X or R6, well, that's just not going to happen. One of the reasons probably behind that is not only will they need to change the memory controller some, but it would also increase the price of the purchase of the memory, which of course would mean that the price of the actual cards would go up for the consumer as well. So what about pricing for these GPUs? Well, of course it does depend upon the model. We don't have a naming convention yet for these cards, so for the sake of this video, although this has not been confirmed, for simplicity's sake, I'm going to refer to them as the 670 and the 680. Shader counts, as I said, are identical, but because of the modest clock speed bump, we should see a nice performance increase over the older generation. Around 10% is the figures we can probably guess, given that the 12nm process would generally allow for that type of clock speed increase over the 14nm process they're currently using. But prices will remain pretty consistent with this generation, so around $200 US. This makes an awful lot of sense from the perspective of AMD. It gives them a nice refresh and allows them to compete more closely to the GTX 1070 compared to what they currently have. It's obviously going to slightly outpace the 1060 card, and if AMD can nail the pricing and with a decent supply chain, I suspect these cards are going to be very popular around the Christmas period. What about performance then? Well, once again, we're simply guessing, but if you were to take a look at any 580 benchmark and roughly add around 8 to 12% of performance, which we can probably guess depending on how memory bandwidth limited these cards are. We don't have any information yet on the clock speeds of the RAM, so I'm going to presume they're almost identical to the current generation, and Polaris can sometimes be memory bandwidth limited. So let's err on the 8 to 10% side. Yes, you can see that without question these GPUs are going to be much better equipped to compete with the 1070s. Not quite getting there by all means, but a lot closer than what AMD can currently claim to do with the mainstream levels of GPUs. Given the pricing of the next generation of NVIDIA cards, such as the 2070, which of course has not been released yet, along with the 2080 and 2080 Ti, that's way outside the realms of affordability for most users, and besides the fact that the price is so much different anyway, they are in completely different segments of the market. So AMD are not looking to compete with Turing, of course. They're not looking to appeal to people with 4K screens. Instead, they're looking to appeal to the mainstream gamer, and I feel these GPUs can do that. So what about the release date then? Well, the 570 successor, which once again I'm just going to call the 670, is going to release around mid-October, so not long to wait then. And the higher end card, which once again I'm just going to call the 680, which is the refresh of the 580, is going to launch the end of this month. Now, if you were to mosey on over to eBay, if you were to look at Amazon, a lot of cards right now are really cheap. This is of course because the mining craze has dipped. So you can actually pick up some really good deals. In fact, I was discussing this with a couple of viewers on Facebook via Pages Manager, and you know, we were kind of making a game of it, of like, okay, well I found this listing and this listing, and we were basically just having fun of putting together random systems, not for any reason, just for the hell of it. and you can put together a really good system right now. Admittedly, it's not going to have an i7-8700K, it's not going to have like a GTX 1080 Ti or something like that, but it would have, you know, an RX 580, it would have a Ryzen 1600X, and you can get those CPUs and those parts really cheaply. So with AMD releasing this refresh, it's going to be fascinating to see how the market responds, particularly for the bargain hunters amongst us. Next up, let's tackle PlayStation 5 rumours. So PS5 rumours are nothing new. We know that the next generation of consoles are coming. This includes the Xbox Scarlett. Well, actually, to call Xbox Scarlett one system would be a disservice. From what we can gather from what Microsoft has said, and they're being somewhat hush-hush about it, as you'd expect, it would seem that the Xbox system is going to be more of a family of consoles. In fact, it's rather fascinating because some murmurs of what Nintendo have said almost hints that they're expecting competition from, well, one of the other console suppliers, and it's possible with rumours that the next generation, or should I say the upgraded Switch, is going to have upgraded specifications, although those are very unconfirmed yet, that Nintendo are almost expecting Scarlett to, yes, have a handheld family of devices. But moving more to the PlayStation side of things, one of the key gripes that PlayStation owners have had with this generation of systems is backwards compatibility. And there's a rather fascinating patent that has popped up, well, rather has been updated. I'll link it in the video description. And it tells us that Sony are not only planning backwards compatibility with the PlayStation 5, but furthermore, they're going to allow emulators to basically increase the quality of the visuals and art and so on compared to the base game. This is a little bit, I suppose, like what Xbox have done with the Xbox One X. So for example, if you were to play a game like an older Halo, you would see that it would increase the resolution, and in some instances with some of the games it would also replace some of the textures with, let's say, an Xbox 360 game. The effect is actually really nice. Some of the older Gear games look pretty darn good. Not quite next generation visuals or anything like that, but the effect is rather pleasing. So let's have a look at some of the patents. In one of the paragraphs it says, and I quote, "Each asset such as a texture called legacy software, such as a legacy computer game software, has a unique identifier associated with it. The unique identifier can be rendered by imposing a hash on the asset, and then the asset stored with its identifier in a data structure. An artist remasters the texture for presentation on a high resolution display, then envisioned in the original software, stores them back in the data structure with their identifiers. The original software is then displayed with high resolution display with asset such as texture called to being intercepted, identified in a data structure entered to retrieve the remastered asset being matching identifier. The remastered asset is then inserted on the fly into the game's presentation." And it can also do very similar things to audio as well. I'm not going to read out the audio patterns, but you can see a couple of the diagrams of essentially what's going on here. Now, if you listen to that and you're like, okay, that doesn't make much sense, what does that actually mean? Well, in a nutshell, just like if you are considering a list of files in Windows Explorer. Now, you could do what I do a lot of the time, and just have like a whole bunch of new folders. But the smarter way to do that, of course, would be to actually name folders. So if you have photos of your grandma, it would be grandma photos. If you had another folder which would be photos of your dog, you know, Jimmy, you would have a Jimmy folder, and of course then you would actually name those pictures as well. So if you were taking Jimmy to the beach, it would be Jimmy Beach 1. Essentially, that's the idea of textures as well. It's not only for the purposes of the artist, but they are essentially identified uniquely so that the game engine knows what it's doing. Obviously, computers need to keep track of objects, it needs to keep track of assets, it needs to keep track of audio files, and so on and so on. So what we have here, in a nutshell anyway, is the ability for this software, assuming it comes to the PlayStation 5, so I'm just going to say the PlayStation 5, to identify a specific texture, let's say, that is being used by a game engine. So let's just say it would be tree.jpg, just for simplicity's sake. Well, let's say that that original tree.jpg, awesome speech there, Paul, was kind of lower resolution. It did its best, bless it, for the PlayStation 3 era, but it's best just doesn't look particularly great now on a 4K display. So what do you do? Well, of course, you could simply run that game on a 4K display and do a bit of upsampling and whatever else, but ideally speaking, you would want to remaster that texture with additional detail. So an artist, assuming that they would put that work into a game, could simply redefine that texture, recreate that texture, and it would do a swapsies. So this is the original tree texture, this is the new tree texture, and the game engine would simply say, okay, well, I know that you're looking for this, but the emulator would simply call this one. And this is nothing new, emulators have done this for a while, but this is a slightly different way of doing it. It's slightly modified, and of course Sony are going to be putting their own spin on it, and we certainly don't have enough information yet to know exactly how functional it is, what level of work it is for the artists, if it's going to be available for all the games, and so on and so on. Nevertheless, it's a really cool piece of functionality, and I for one look forward to seeing how Sony will implement this in the future with games. And now a very small update to the next generation of Intel processors. No, this is not leaks about the performance or the specifications. We've certainly had enough of those benchmarks and enough of the leaks of the specifications. I think we all know it's 8 cores, 16 threads, and on a Z390 platform by now, and we all know that there's going to be a new, or two actually, HEDT platforms Intel are releasing, but we want an official announcement, gosh darn it. When is that going to happen? Well, actually a lot sooner than what we'd anticipated. I was actually more expecting this to happen in a few weeks, but no, we have it now. According to Intel, or rather specifically a tweet, it will be the 8th of October at 10 AM EDT. It's a very short tweet that Intel have put out there. Every PC user is unique. We're special, with a wide variety of performance needs and requirements to ensure their success. Tune in at 10 AM EDT, 7 AM PDT on Monday, October 8th on the Intel Newsroom to learn more about the latest PC performance developments from Intel. End quote. Once again, we know that there are at the very least one line of products that they're going to announce, and that is the 9th generation of processors, which is essentially a refresh of Skylake. There are some weird things we know about this, like the 9700K will not have hyperthreading but will be 8 cores, the 9600K will be 6 cores, the 9900K will be 8 cores, 16 threads, and so on. But I want official pricing, I want some performance numbers with any luck. I also do wonder if Intel are going to touch on other anticipated things, like perhaps some indication of what they're doing with the GPUs, the discrete GPUs, just to clarify. I don't think they will yet. After all, the GPUs are not supposed to launch for a couple of years yet, but I would at least like them to say, okay, well, even if we're not, going to give performance numbers, which is way too early, I would like them to at least clarify if they're going to go gaming, or if they're going to produce, what segments of the market essentially they're going to tackle with those cards. I think it's a bit early for them to announce that, at least from it makes sense, because otherwise we're going to give all the information to competitors anyway. But let's face it, it's probable that Intel have spies in AMD and Nvidia and vice versa for all of the other companies involved, because, well, industrial espionage is not really, it's normal, let's just put it that way. That's just about it for this video. I'd also like to give a quick reminder that I've put out a ray tracing RTX 2080 Ti video versus a 1080 Ti video. You can find that linked in the video description, or you can search for it on the channel. I'd also like to give a quick shout out to you for watching the video. If you've enjoyed the content, well, you know what to do. Do the like thing, comment, let me know what you would like Intel to be pricing these new processors at, and specifically what CPU lineup would you be most interested in? Is it the 9th generation of processors? Is it one of the HEDT lineup of processors? Jesus, I'm having one of those days. I didn't sleep that great last night. Anyway, yeah, so let me know, and would you consider a Polaris refresh? Let me know. And one final thing, we're also on Patreon, which you can find linked in the video description, along with an Amazon affiliate link if you decide to use it. Not pushing you to or anything like that. Just know if you do, it gives us a couple of dollars, and it does help out the channel. And I'd also like to thank HB Computers as well for loaning me an Omen X laptop. But with all of that said, I sincerely wish you the best day possible. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.